Alright, what's the worst DMing advice you've ever heard? Never tell your players no. Half of your job is knowing when to tell your players no. Yes, and is very powerful and good for player engagement. However, no but is useful for those insane and out of left field player requests that you can tone down to something more reasonable. You can trust your players to know when homebrew is broken. Got that fixed very fast. You don't need to prep, just improvise. While it is good, if not important, to be good at improvising, I can tell when you haven't done any prep at all. Saw a hot take about a month ago. A DM said he didn't track HP, just had enemies die after a certain number of hits regardless of damage. He had to keep this a secret from his players so they wouldn't get mad. This guy had multiple groups collapse over this and couldn't believe that maybe, just maybe, his idea was stupid. Don't bother reading the DMG, Dungeon Master Guide. It's useless. I've been DMing for 30 years and nothing in the 5th edition DMG was new to me. Haha, paraphrased, as it was a while ago, but you get the idea. I think the way you handled that situation could have been better. You should watch Critical Role and this podcast to get some tips on how to make your rulings and act it out. Also, I like the way that Baldur's Gate 3 does this, where one party member, your character, is the leader. Only they should talk. This was said by a friend who has never played in a D&D campaign before and has only played in one-shot, telling me how to handle a situation in Lost Mines of Phandelver that I went about by rules as written. Bro, deck of many things, you gotta get in on that quick. I don't allow girls at my table. Girls don't know how to play the game. Volunteer RPGA DM to a group of other volunteer RPGA DMs, including Laura Hickman. Laura Hickman was one of the first women to ever write for TSR, authoring several modules and creating several settings like Ravenloft and Dragonlance. Yeah, I bet you didn't DM for a while after that. Potential recoil damage for spellcasting. Somebody in my upcoming group proposed the potential for recoil damage when casting spells without slots at that level. I ran through the numbers, and it allowed infinite healing and made their Druid Barbarian Paladin the most broken build I have ever seen. Oh, their justification? It's cool. Cantrips are boring, and you could just ban healing spells. I think this sub is full of good DMing advice, but there's plenty of advice that is group dependent and treated as though it isn't. All of the never railroad your players, never plan out a plot advice leaves me scratching my head because I know my group. They need the direction. They want a campaign on the rails. Hell, one of my players literally said that. So you better believe that I've got notes that say, the players start here. They'll go here and do this thing. Then they'll go here and do this thing. And 0 notes that say, this faction has this goal, and that faction has that goal, and whatever the players decide to do will affect how the world takes shape. For me, the worst DM advice is that it's bad to prep by trying to anticipate what your players will do. I've seen so many versions of this advice that treat it as railroading and taking away player agency, and I think it's generally bad advice for new DMs. It takes a lot of skill and experience to be able to comfortably go into a situation with no idea on how it will turn out. Spending some time in prep about thinking about how your players might tackle the problems you throw at them and running possible scenarios in your head will make you feel more confident. And there's nothing wrong with that. It also doesn't stop you from letting the players surprise you and doing some improv if they happen to take an approach you didn't anticipate. In fact, I would say your improv is going to be easier if you've already thought about a few possible outcomes, because that just means you have a better understanding of the situation. Make sure the players know who is boss. Yeah, this was often used to justify major plot and combat gaps. The Chimera is too stupid to care about your threat of more guards coming. And then 3 seconds later, it tricked us into following it through a series of complex traps that it knew about, knew how to use, and later, we learned it made itself. Whoa! Yes, I am the DM. I put in a lot more work. Yes, I can kick you from the game if you're a problem, but we should be friends and not have a boss-to-employee dynamic. Use in-game solutions to out-of-game problems. Huh? A player is being a murder hobo? Put a CR20 shopkeeper in. PC is being a dick. Have the NPCs focus on him until they leave the game. Always talk outside the game about in-game and out-of-game issues. Player behavior, PC behavior, attitudes, hygiene, stinky, etc. Don't think they will get it or feel punished by actions within the game. The worst is they will feel justified in their behavior because you didn't address it outside of the game. And they will continue to do the same thing. Communication is key, people. All of your possible issues can be cleared up in Session 0. Oh, I'm tired of hearing this, mostly because many people who have a problem with something won't realize just how much of an issue it is for them until they actually encounter it. Additionally, people who are typically problematic players are unlikely to respect the boundaries that you set. So, just kick them out. Duh. Well, sometimes it's not that simple. The problem player could be a family member or someone you live with, God forbid, making the situation more complicated. There might be worse consequences to removing that player. This is why I believe both of these recommendations are cop-outs rather than obvious solutions. Not everyone started playing this game when it became popular. Back in my day, the game wasn't a safe topic to discuss publicly, and the pool of players was so small that you risked being outright shunned if you reacted that way. Run everything theater of the mind. Like it or not, D&D is a system that involves grids and measurements. I've run 1, maybe 2 combats in theater of the mind, and they took much longer and involved a lot more back and forth than if I had done even the bare minimum by placing tokens on a white void. Don't keep track of hit points. Just wait until you feel your players have earned it. If a player builds their character to have high AC, only throw saving throws at them. If they make a monk, never use projectiles. If they are a wizard, focus fire on them at the start of combat, etc., etc. These quotes are from a guy I met at a bachelor party. He said a lot more crazy antagonistic DM things, but this is what really stood out to me. I was so eager to talk D&D with him, but then I immediately wanted to do anything else. The dude was a nightmare, and I could not imagine playing with him. The only reason I didn't confront him was because he was the best man. One of my players said he could see my eye twitching every time this guy started talking. Breaking Grodd's law, using penalties to disincentivize things that you don't like, rather than fixing the underlying problem. Here's an example. The DM didn't like whack-a-mole combat where players keep coming back from 1 HP. So, they ran a one-shot to try out an injury system where you get a cumulative -1 to all your D20 rolls each time you're healed to consciousness, including death saves. You could remove 1 or 2 -1s per long rest depending on how good the resting location was. Camping removes 0. Why? Camping can be so fun. In practice, we played as safely as we could, but that wasn't much safer than we normally did, and the newer players and melee characters were hit the hardest, stacking up bigger penalties. Instead of less whack-a-mole combat, we stopped wanting to play because our characters couldn't do anything anymore. The fix to whack-a-mole combat is negative hit points. Instead of stopping at 0, if you're at 3 and take 8 damage, now you're at -5. Healing is no longer amplified after the person is unconscious. Any healing equals consciousness, so the only difference between healing before and healing after is that healing beforehand prevents them from going prone. Don't fudge your rolls. I know there is a very split opinion on this. Comment yours below. My players have always had fun, but I have never ever seen them happier or more engaged in discussing sessions than after I started fudging rolls to help the story and create epic moments. Nothing makes a playgroup happier than a character pulling off some crazy shenanigans to take out a baddie, even if the only reason it worked was because I didn't allow the nat 20 I rolled for the baddie save to go through. My players may suspect it, but I will never let them know that I fudge rolls. I had one player start to DM, and when he came to me for advice, this was one of the things I told him about. He loves being able to aid in his players having really cool moments. It genuinely frightens me how many people say, "If the players can do it, so can the monsters." Okay, let's be real for a moment. The monsters are not as vital as the players are, otherwise they'd have death saves. Talk to your table if something is an issue. Silvery barbs, instead of ruining it for everyone with pettiness, just ban the spell. If they plow through your monsters, switch up the situations if you want something to be a threat, which also leads to the point that not everything has to be. They are adventurers. You can literally remedy this by making non-adventurers possible casualties and by making weak monsters extremely dangerous to them. Players and monsters have different rule sets for a reason, because the game is meant to be fun for all, not DM versus PC. Create a pantheon if your world has gods. There will certainly be priests and clerics that follow them, so they're super important to get right to make everything else. I read from someone else years later that unless you're specifically working on a campaign with a high interest in mythology and the like, there's literally almost no reason to give a cinnamon toast fuck about who the gods are or the depth of their domains. In contrast, players like lore that's interesting to them, and if it's not in some way relevant to them, then it doesn't really matter to write more than 2 sentences about it. Your players should learn about the world with you. All you truly need to know is what's relevant to them and what kind of story you want to tell. My final piece of advice that's helped me is to prep just enough to get a skeleton going and leave the rest to be determined at the table. Giving space for things to naturally grow after the seeds you plant is a skill that I think many, including myself, often miss. Plant the seed, but let your players water it. Just make enough relevant ties to the characters so they find the seed interesting enough to water. Hey everybody, Brian Von VA checking in after the vid. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, ring that bell, and if you want to help us keep the lights on, go ahead and sign up for a membership. You get some outtakes for sure, because I record a bunch of them, and I am kind of dumb sometimes, and you get early access to videos, maybe more, we'll see. But that said, what is the worst DMing advice you ever heard? Leave in the comments below, tell us that you love us, because we love you too, and have a very nice day.